At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce to you your second featured speaker of the day. This is an individual who's very unique in many ways, not the least of which is the fact that he hails from Yazoo City, Mississippi, and he's made an incredible name for himself in personal motivation of people. His name is Zig Ziglar. He's the recent author of a book entitled See You at the Top, which interestingly enough is now being taught in many, many schools throughout America. Zig Ziglar is a man who's done an incredible job of programming the thinking of many, many people in a positive manner. He's one of those individuals who also, fortunately, has an incredible track record. His background, frankly, is sales. And he was number 2 in a sales organization of over 3,000 salespeople nationally, and number 1 in a sales organization of over 7,000 salespeople nationally. He has won everything from Lincoln Continentals to dollars in contests for his production, which he attributes to his own attitude and his ability to get out and get the job done based on that attitude. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you to join me in giving a warm welcome for your second featured speaker from Dallas, Texas, who will cover a topic called Biscuits, Fleas, and Pump Handles, Mr. Zig Ziglar.
Hey! My goodness! Well, I'll tell you, I wish the folks from Yazoo City could see me now. I was coming in on the plane this morning from Oklahoma City, which is generally the way I fly. And I was seated next to an old boy, and I couldn't help but notice that he had his wedding band on this finger, which is a little unusual to say the least. And I commented on it. I said, "Friend, you got your wedding band there on the wrong finger." And he said, "Yeah, I married the wrong woman." Well, I said, "You know, a man makes a mistake, he's not stuck with it, is it?" He said, "Looks like I am. This is the 7th time I've been married to that girl." I said, "7 times, same woman?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how does that happen?" He said, "Well, every time I get a little behind in my alimony, she just repossesses me." I said, "Well, what did she do that's so bad?" And he said, "Well, one thing, she'd come in the morning, she'd pour water in bed with me." I said, "Well, that is bad." He said, "Yeah, but you hadn't heard the worst. He said, some days she'd come in, she'd throw a cat in bed with me." I said, "Now, that's bad." He said, "It is when you're sleeping with a dog." Mr. B called a meeting, had all of his people together. He said, "I noticed that some of you are coming to work late. I noticed some of you are leaving early. I noticed that some of you spend too much time on a coffee break, some too much time on a lunch break." But he said, "Now, you know, maybe that's not your fault. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I've not provided the leadership for you. Maybe I've not set the kind of an example for you that I should have been setting, so I'm going to change that." He said, "I'm going to start coming to work early. I'm going to leave late. I'm going to take short coffee breaks, short lunch breaks." Oh, it was a kind of speech that would really give you that old rah-rah spirit for everybody. Do or die for old universal you kind of a thing, you know. Well, his intentions were good. About 4 days later, though, he was out at a local country club. He became engrossed in a business conversation. He forgot about that little speech, and he forgot about the time also. All of a sudden, he looked at his watch. He said, "Oh, my goodness, I'm due back to the office in 5 minutes. He hopped up, made a mad dash to his automobile, hopped in, scratched off, burned rubber like nobody you've ever seen, doing about 90 miles an hour down the freeway. And the long arm of the law entered the picture and gave him a ticket. Now, you're talking about a man that was unhappy. Mr. B was absolutely furious. He said, "This is ridiculous. Here I am, a peaceful, tax-paying, law-abiding citizen, minding my own business, and what does this guy do? He comes along and gives me a ticket. What he ought to be doing is out looking for the robbers, the murderers, the arsonists, the people who are breaking the law, leave us peaceful, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens alone." Oh, he was really upset. And by the time he got back to the office, it was about 45 minutes late, and he was really blowing his cool. And he did what management has done since the beginning of time. Every time they get their hand caught in the cookie jar, they say, "Look yonder," and then nobody looks here. In a very loud voice, he called for his sales manager. He said, "Come on in here. I want to talk to you about the Armstrong account. I want to find out what happened to it. You've been fiddling with that thing for 6 long months. You could have sold the deal a dozen times. Just tell me either yes, you got it, or no, you didn't." Oh, he was really upset. Sales manager came in, ducked his head, had in his hand kind of an approach to life, you know, and he said, "Mr. B," said, "I don't know how to tell you this. He said, I thought I had that deal. I thought it was sold. I thought it was mine. But he said, you know, at the last minute it came unglued and I lost the sale, and I'm sure sorry. Well, if you think he was sorry then, you should have watched him about 2 minutes later, because Mr. B really got upset now. He said, this is ridiculous. You've been my sales manager for 18 years. I've depended on you to bring in new business, and now I have a chance to get the biggest account of all, and what do? You blow it. Well, let me tell you something, friend. Just because you've been here 18 years does not mean that you got a lifetime contract. Now, you're going to replace that business, or I'm going to replace you. Oh, he was really upset. I'll tell you, I guess, you know, I do go about 280 words a minute with Gus up to about 550, and I guess that is a little fast. Let's hear it for the gentleman on the balcony. What do you say? Okay. So he goes storming out of the office, muttering under his breath, this is ridiculous. For 18 years I've been running this company. I'm the only one that knows what's going on around here. Why, if it hadn't been for me, the company would have gone broke 10 years ago. And now he uses this cheap method. He fires me just because, or threatens to fire me, just because I missed out on one lousy sale. This is ridiculous. This absolutely is not fair. Oh, he was really upset. Called his secretary in. He said, you remember those 5 letters I gave you this morning? Have you gotten them out yet, or have you been piddling around with something else? She said, no, don't you remember you told me that the Hilliard account took precedence over everything else, and I've been working on the Hilliard account. No, I have not had time to work on those letters. Oh, if you think he'd been upset before, you should have seen him now. He really hit the ceiling again. He said, you know, you've been here 8 years, and that does not give you license to stay forever. I told you that I wanted those letters out. I want them out today, and if you cannot get them out, I'm going to get me somebody that can. Oh, he was really upset. But if you think he's upset, you should have seen the secretary. She goes storming out of his office. She slams the door behind her back, muttering under her breath, this is ridiculous. Why, for 8 years I've been running this company. If it hadn't been for me, that'd have gone down the tube a long time ago. Why, nobody around here knows anything about how to run a company except me. And now he threatens to fire me because I cannot do 2 things at once. This is absolutely ridiculous. And besides, as much as I know about him and him fire me, this is ridiculous. Oh, she is upset. She walked out of the switchboard operator's desk. She said, I got 5 letters. I want you to get them out. Now, no, ordinarily this is not your job, but you don't do anything anyhow but sit out here and occasionally answer the telephone. I'm going to tell you this one time and one time only. I want you to get these letters out, and if you can't get them out, I'm going to get me somebody that can. Oh, she was really upset. But if you think she was upset, you should have seen that switchboard operator. She about hit the ceiling. This is ridiculous. Well, I'm the only one that knows what's going on around in this company. They don't do anything in the back but gossip, drink coffee, talk on the telephone. Every once in a while they get out some work, and the minute they get behind, they come out here and they put it on my desk, and they say, now, if you don't get it out, I'm going to fire you. This is not fair. But she got the letters out. She got home, she was still upset. She walked in the front door, she slammed the front door behind her, she walked in the den, and the first thing she saw was a 12-year-old son laying there on the floor watching television. The second thing she saw was a big rip right across the seat of his breeches. She said, son, how many times have I told you? When you come home from school, put your play clothes on. Mother has a hard enough time as it is supporting you and sending you through school. Now, because you've disobeyed me, I'm going to send you up to your room right now. Going to be no supper tonight, no television for the next 3 weeks. Oh, she was really upset. But if you think she is upset, you should have seen that little boy. He hopped up, started running out of the den, muttering under his breath, this is terrible. I was doing something to my own mother. It was an accident. Could have happened to anybody. Doesn't even give me a chance to explain. This is not fair. And about that time, his tomcat walked in front of him, which was a mistake. Boy gives the tomcat a big old boot and said, you get out of here. You've probably been up to some no good yourself. Now, folks, if you think about it just for a moment, that tomcat was the only creature that could not have altered that series of events. And if you think about it for that much more time, wouldn't it have been so much better if Mr. B had gone directly from the country club to the switchboard operator's house and just kicked that cat himself? Let me ask you a question. Whose cat have you been kicking recently? Let me ask you another question. Have you been letting somebody kick your cat? You see, the truth of the matter is we live in a negative, cat-kicking world. And the only difference between the bum on the Bowery and the superintendent of your school, the only difference between the bum on the Bowery and Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, the only difference between the bum on the Bowery and the most successful individual in your company, the only difference between the bum on the Bowery and the mother of the year is the way they react to the negative situations of life. I don't care who you are. I don't care what business you're in. I don't care what you do. I don't care what your age is. Every living, breathing human being on the face of this earth faces disappointments, frustrations, heartache, reverses, and setbacks. But the difference in our success, whether we make it or fail to make it, is the way we react to the negative situations of life. The question, my friends, is how do you react to the negative? Did you ever go in a restaurant for a cup of coffee and sit there and sit there and sit there, and finally you very timidly say to the waitress, "Miss, could I have a cup of coffee?" And she said, "Can't you see I'm busy? I'll get to you as quickly as I can." How do you react? Do you say, "Well, you don't have to bite my head off about it, do you?" You ever check out of a restaurant? Or you ever check out of a motel, and the night clerk or the clerk just takes your head off? Can you understand that it's got nothing whatever to do with you, but somebody probably stopped by and kicked his cat just before you got there? Did you ever have a good day out in the world working? I mean, everything was good. People were courteous. They were thoughtful. They were polite and considerate. Everything went your way. And you get home in the evening, you know, you're whistling and you're singing, and you call out to your mate, "Hi, honey, how you doing?" "What do you mean, how am I doing? You're supposed to have been here an hour and a half ago. If you've been putting out what I've been putting out with, you would be in a bad mood too. Come on back here and tell me what you've been doing." Can you understand that it's got nothing to do with you? Somebody's been kicking the mate's cat all day long. The question is, how do we react to the negative situations of life? I'm going to make the contention, ladies and gentlemen, that if you have direction in your life, that if you have goals in your life, that you will react positively to the negative situations of life. You're going to be able to understand that a little setback is not the whole ocean front, but rather it is the pebble on the beach. Let's talk about those goals just for a moment. I want to ask you a question. Have you got your goals clearly defined, written down, laid out, so that you can identify them specifically? You know definitely what it is that you want, where you're going, how you're going to get there. Did you realize that only 3% of the American people have defined their objectives? I want to talk about that a great deal because I'm persuaded beyond any doubt that goals are an absolute must. But I want to say to you there are three basic reasons why people do not set those goals. Number one, they've never been sold. Oh, they've been told, but they've never been sold. I'm flat going to sell you, my brothers and sisters, on why you got to have them. Number two, they have never been shown how to set those goals. We're going to cover that. And the third reason they do not have their goals is that there's a certain amount of fear involved in an individual. You see, when you say, "This I'm going to do," and then you don't, you have been wrong at the top of your voice. And most people simply do not want to be wrong at the top of their voices. That's one of the reasons for many years as a sales manager, many times I would be talking to my salespeople, and I'd try to get them to make commitments. And how many times would I have a person say, "Well, I know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to stand up there and tell everybody else because I hate these smart alecks that are always sounding off about what they're going to do and then they don't do it. Now, when I reach my goal, then I'll tell you what I was going to do." What they're really saying is, "Brother, I'm scared to death I ain't going to make it, and I'm not about to tell you about a failure that's on the way for me." You got to have goals. Can you imagine Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to scale Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the whole world. Can you imagine him climbing down off that high mountain and a reporter coming up to interview him and saying to him, Sir Edmund, tell us, how did you climb the tallest mountain in the whole world? Do you believe he said, well, I was just out walking around. Somehow or another, I don't believe that's the way it happened. Can you believe the chairman of the board for General Motors, and somebody comes to him and said to him, how did you get to be chairman of the board for General Motors? Do you believe he said, well, I just showed up for work, and they started promoting me, and then here I am, chairman of the board, General Motors. No, I don't believe it happened that way. I did a survey of the Yale seniors a number of years ago. They discovered that of the graduating seniors, only 3% of them had clearly defined, written down, specific goals. 20 years later, they did another survey of those seniors who had graduated. They discovered that the 3% had accomplished more than the 97% who did not have those goals. What about you? Have you got your goals? Are you a wandering generality, or are you a meaningful specific? A number of years ago, Jean-Henri Fabre, the great French naturalist, conducted a series of experiments with some processionary caterpillars. They're so named because they follow each other in a procession. He lined those caterpillars around a flower pot until they formed a continuous circle. In the center of the flower pot, he put some pine needles, which is the food of the processionary caterpillar. And those caterpillars started going around and around and around. 24 full hours a day, 7 full days and 7 full nights, they went around and around and around until they literally dropped dead from starvation and exhaustion. With an abundance of food less than 3 inches away, they starved to death because they confused activity with accomplishment. What about you? Are you a wandering generality? Or are you a meaningful specific? You see, right here in Kansas City, and for that matter, the 43 states and the 4 countries that are represented here at this mammoth gathering today, whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever you do, there are people in your own company, in your own business, who are starving to death, are not doing well. There are others who are doing extraordinarily well. There are some, you see, who are like the processionary caterpillars. They're going in 900 different directions. They're confusing activity with accomplishment. And the net result is, although they might be busy, they're not going anywhere because they have no destination. So many people are kind of like this old boy down home, and those of you who know me know there are an awful lot of old boys down home, at least it was when I was down there. His wife sent him uptown to buy ham. He came home with the ham, and she said, honey, you didn't cut the end of it off. And he said, you didn't tell me to. Why, she said, I thought you knew we always cut the end off the ham. And he said, why? She said, because Mama cut the end of the ham off. And he said, well, Mama's in the kitchen. Let's go back there and ask her why she cut the end of the ham off. So they got back to the kitchen and said, Mama, how come you cut the end of the ham off? She said, I cut the end of the ham off because my mama cut the end of the ham off. And the old boy said, well, Grandma's long distance, but let's call Grandma long distance and find out why she cut the end of the ham off. So they called Grandma long distance and said, Grandma, how come you cut the end of the ham off? She said, I cut the end of the ham off because my roaster was too small. See, there's so many people who don't have any reasons. Now, Grandma had a reason. What about you? Have you got a reason, or are you a wandering generality? You can't make it as that. You got to be a meaningful specific. Some of you folks here today might recognize the name of Howard Hill, the greatest archer that ever lived. He was a good Alabama boy, died a couple of years ago. Howard Hill won 286 consecutive archery tournaments. He was never beaten in competition. He killed a Cape buffalo, the Bengal tiger, the bull elephant with a bow and arrow. As a youngster, I have seen Howard Hill from 50 feet. I saw these in newsreels. Take his bow and arrow, and he would split the bullseye perfectly in the center. And then he would take the next arrow, and he would literally split that first arrow with the second one. An amazing demonstration of skill. So when I make this next statement, you're undoubtedly going to raise your eyebrows a bit. You see, I've never shot a bow and arrow except my son's 30-pound pull, which is not exactly a professional bow. But I could spend 20 minutes with any one of you in this audience today. And at the end of 20 minutes, I would have you hitting the bullseye more consistently than Howard Hill hit it the best day of his career. Provided, of course, we blindfolded Howard Hill and turned him around a time or two to confuse him, and you kind of snicker, and some of you smirk and say, well, that's the silliest thing I ever heard, Ziglar. How in the world could a man hit a target he could not even see? Excellent question. I think here's one that's equally significant. How can you hit a target that you do not have? Have you got one? Are you a wandering generality, or are you a meaningful specific? Will you go to work tomorrow because that's where you were yesterday? And if that is the reason you go to work tomorrow because that's where you were yesterday, you won't be as good at it tomorrow as you were yesterday because you're 2 days older and no closer to getting to your destination. You got to have them. It's as difficult to reach a destination you do not have as it is to come back from a place you've never been. 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, I was flying over Niagara Falls. Had never flown over the falls from the air before. We were at about 28,000 feet. The aircraft was almost deserted. And the captain of the aircraft came over the intercom and he said, for those of you who have never seen Niagara from the air, you should go to the left-hand side of the aircraft and look down because it's a magnificent sight. And so, never having seen it, I went to the left-hand side of the aircraft. And even though we were 28,000 feet, which is over 5 miles, even though by then we were an additional 5 miles in distance, 10 miles away, watching those 3 million gallons of water per minute falling down 180 feet, hitting the rocks below, you could get a feeling of the enormous power of Niagara. And then my mind turned backwards in time. For thousands of years, trillions of tons of water had fallen, hit the rocks below, dissipated into the distance, utilizing only a minute potential, a fraction of the potential that was there. And then one day a man came along with a plan. And he looked at the falling water and he thought to himself, you know, if we were to take a portion of this water and harness it, if we were to aim it at a wheel and get that wheel to turning, we could generate hydroelectricity, and that's exactly what he did. And since then they've generated trillions of kilowatt hours of electricity. And with this electricity they've built homes and schools and factories. They've paved highways. They've educated children. They've raised crops. They've built hospitals. They've healed the sick. They raised the standard of living. They created industry, and it came about because one day a man came along who had a plan. What about you? Have you got a plan? Are you a wandering generality, or are you a meaningful specific? I started writing this book of mine some 3 years ago. And incidentally, you're considered underprivileged until you own this book. I highly recommend it. It's now in its 5th printing. It's been translated into Braille. It's now going into 2 foreign languages. It is being taught in a lot of the schools around the country. And I started writing this book. I wrote such words as you can go where you want to go. You can do what you want to do. You can be like you want to be. And as I wrote those words, I got to confess to you, I held it out there and I said to myself, now, Ziglar, that's pretty good. As a matter of fact, I got to talking to myself, which is perfectly all right. It's all right even to answer. But if you ever catch yourself saying, huh? You know, to the answer, you got a problem. Well, I heard myself saying, huh, a couple of times because, you see, I had to hold the book way out because between me and the book was 41-inch waistline and 202 pounds of Ziglar. And as I wrote the words, you can be like you want to be, the thought occurred to me that one of these days maybe you and I might cross paths. And I could just imagine you coming up to me and saying, Ziglar, you believe what you write? And I was going to say, man, yeah. And then you might say, you believe everything you write. And I was going to say, sure do. And then I could imagine you poking me in that 41-inch waistline and saying, Ziglar, are you really the way that you want to be? And then I was going to have to kind of back up a little bit, and I was going to have to say, Cabot, well, you know, us authors, we do have to take a little literary license every once in a while. And then I could imagine somebody saying, in other words, Ziglar, you lied about it. Now, wait a minute, friend. That's pretty hard words. Well, you're at least a hypocrite then. And then I was going to say, man, don't you call me no hypocrite. Nobody likes hypocrites. You're not going to believe this, but there are even some people that say they don't go to church because it's a bunch of hypocrites down there. I knew you wouldn't believe it. Of course, I always tell those folks, friend, if a hypocrite is standing between you and God, that just means the hypocrite's a little closer to God than you are. So I don't believe I'd say that one anymore. I get the tickle of the people who say they read the Bible, but they don't understand it. Of course, I don't think it's the part they don't understand that bothers them. You'll notice God speaks very clearly. I bet you've already observed He didn't call them the 10 suggestions, didn't you? I mean, about as clear as you can get. So I was writing those words, you know, you can be like you want to be, and then it dawned on me, I better do something about me. You see, my boy was 8 years old at the time. And I believe every father ought to be able to whip his children until they're 12. And at the rate I was going, I wasn't even going to be able to catch mine, much less whipping. But the straw that broke the camel's back, that redhead of mine kept telling me to hold my stomach in, and I already was. So I knew I had to do something. I went down to Cooper's clinic. Now, Cooper wrote the book, Aerobics. When you see people out jogging around, you know that Kenneth Cooper had an influence on that man's running. He wrote the book, Aerobics. And so I went down for that 5-hour examination. It's quite an examination. First thing they did was took 2 quarts of my blood. Well, it looked like 2 quarts. I tell you, they filled so many little vials there, I thought they were opening a branch of the blood bank right then and there. And then they dunked me in a tank of water 3 times, completely submerged me, and the purpose was to determine the percentage of body fat that I had. And when I got through, they told me that I was 23 and 9/10% pure lard. And then they put me on one of those treadmills, and on the treadmills, you know, you walk and walk and walk and walk, and the further or the longer you can walk, the better your physical condition. Well, I could see the little meter over there, and the worst one was horrible. I was determined I was going to get out of horrible. Made it by 4 seconds. And then the young doctor called me, and Dr. Martin was doing the analysis, you know. He had all of his facts. 202. Brother, I made a commitment, I'll guarantee you. I put my money where my mouth was in a whole lot of different ways. So I knew I had to do something. So I took that 37 pounds divided by 10. And I found out all I had to do was lose 3 7/10 pounds a month. Now that's easy, isn't it? That's not even a pound a week. Man, I knew in my mind I wouldn't have any difficulty at all losing 3 7/10 pounds a month. As a matter of fact, I was so confident that I'd lose 3 7/10 pounds a month that was no trouble at all. I was so certain of it that I didn't even bother to get started the first 28 days. Which brings us to the next point, you see. I was raised down in Yazoo City, Mississippi. We live next door to some rich folks. Now, a lot of folks today are claiming to be from Yazoo City just kind of as name droppers, but I really am. We live next door to some rich folks. I know they were rich for 2 very basic reasons. Number 1, they had a cook. Number 2, the cook had something to cook. And during the Depression, that was a sure sign of wealth. Now, I was over there for lunch one day, as I tried to be, most every day. I don't want you to misunderstand that. Now, we certainly had plenty to eat at my house. I know we had plenty because every time I passed my plate for seconds, they'd always tell me, no, you've had plenty. So I know we had plenty. And the cook brought the biscuits out. This is not an exaggeration. Those biscuits were no thicker than my wristwatch. I looked at those biscuits. I said, Maud, what in the world happened to your biscuits? She reared back, gave that big old tummy laugh, and said, well, I'll tell you about those biscuits. She said they squatted to rise. But she said they just got cooked in the squat. Hey, you know somebody that gets cooked in the squat? You know somebody that says, well, you know, just as soon as the kids get out of school, man, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to tear this business up. Then the kids get out of school, they say, well, you know, I didn't realize it, but now I got to take them everywhere. Wait till they get back in school. And when they get back in school, they say, well, you know, we got a winning football team this year, and I got to support the team. I mean, that's my duty. And wait till after football season is over, then I'm really going to get after it. After football season, they say, well, you know, it's so close to Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and the Super Bowl. Wait till after all of those events are over, then, man, I'm really going to get after it. After that, they say, well, you know, it's cold now, and it's snowing, and the sleet's coming down. Wait till the weather lightens up a little bit, then I'll really go. When the weather lights up, and they say, well, you know, it's been a long, hard winter, and I played no golf, had no chance to go fishing, done no work out in the yard. Wait till I do some of that, then I'll really get at it. Then they say, well, you know, Easter is here now. Wait till after Easter. After Easter, they say, well, you know, the kids are almost ready to get out of school. Wait till after the kids get out of school. But that's where we came in, wasn't it? See, if you wait till Aunt Matilda moves out, or John gets on the day shift, or the interest rate drops a point, or you trade in the old clunker, if you wait until outside events take place before you start doing something with your life, you're going to go through life as a wandering generality. And you'll never realize the enormous amount of potential that's inside of you, and that's the tragedy. See, man was designed for accomplishment. He's engineered for success. He's endowed with the seeds of greatness. I'll go to my grave convinced that God wants us to have good health, wealth, and happiness. I believe the natural state of affairs is to have those things. I get so amused sometimes at some of my Christian friends. They say, well, Zig, how do you reconcile all that talk about money with Christianity? And I always kind of laugh and say, well, it's easy. You know, I believe that God made the diamonds for his folks, not Satan's bunch. That's the way I feel about it. I believe that so long as money does not become your God, that you're morally obligated to earn large amounts of it. See, a lot of people don't have any money because they don't understand it. They talk about cold, hard cash. And my brothers and sisters, it's neither cold nor hard. It's soft and warm, and it feels good. And I believe it's a worthy goal. A lot of times people say, well, I don't want to make a lot of money. You know, I believe a man or a woman that say a thing like that would lie about other things too. Now, as a matter of fact, let me make certain we're communicating. You can get everything in life that you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. Let me give you some analogies or examples. Are you a salesman? If you're selling a product that solves a problem, you'll get what you want if you solve enough problems. Is that not true? If you're a sales manager, if you can inspire, enthuse, motivate the people in your organization to be more productive, then you're going to get what you want. You'll get a bigger override because you're helping your people get what they want. See, American Sales Training Association and Success Unlimited can get what they want if they can bring something to you that will help you get what you want. As a speaker, as a sales trainer, I get what I want if I can help you get what you want. You might say, well, Ziglar, what do you want? Well, obviously, I want to be invited back to Kansas City. Yeah. And it'll be a shame if I'm not, because my next talk is so much better than this one, you know. But, you know, I got sense enough to know that if I don't deliver today, there's going to be no next time. And you're in exactly the same category. If you don't deliver in what you do, there's going to be no next time. Had a football coach at the session last evening for one of the winningest teams in America. And this coach is in exactly the same position as you are. He can get what he wants. Anybody have any idea what he wants? He wants to keep his job. He wants to build a winning team. Now, he'll help the alumni. He'll help his team. He'll help his school. If he can help them get what they want, they're going to guarantee that he gets what he wants. You a mother or a father, you want to raise good kids. What do most parents want? Isn't it successful, healthy, well-adjusted children? And aren't we as parents, don't we want our kids to be those things, and all we got to do is help them, and we're going to get what we want as parents. Any way you go, that's the way it's going to work. The fifth thing about that goal of mine is we then broke it down on a daily basis. The late Charlie Cullen expressed it so eloquently when he said the opportunity for greatness does not come cascading down like a torrential Niagara Falls. He said it comes slowly, one drop at a time. I divided the 3 7/10 pounds per month by 30, and I discovered that all I had to do was lose 1 9/10 ounces a day. And if I could just lose 1 9/10 ounces a day, then in 10 months' time, I would have lost my 37 pounds. See, I didn't gain 37 pounds in one weekend. It is one more bite that done me in. And you see, that's true of life. It's the little things. Put them all together, and it makes a big difference. You can call a girl a kitten, she'll love you. Call her a cat, and you got a problem. Say she's a vision, you score all kind of points. Call her a sight, and you're in trouble. Or can you imagine a man saying to his wife, you know, honey, when I look into your eyes, the wheels of time just stand still. Now, that's beautiful. Can you imagine him saying, you know, honey, you got a face that'd stop a clock? You know? It's not really that much difference, but oh, brother, is there a difference? See, if this watch of mine were 4 hours wrong, I wouldn't have any trouble. See, I can look at a watch and tell you instantly if it's 4 hours wrong, but if it's 4 minutes wrong, I got a problem, haven't I? Because you see, tomorrow at 11:11, I get aboard an aircraft going back to Dallas. Now, if I'm 4 minutes wrong and I get there at 11:15, I got a problem because, you see, I made a deal with the airlines that if I wasn't there when they got ready to go, that they were just to go ahead without me. And I found out last summer in Dallas that they lived up to their end of the agreement. I also found out it's easier to catch those dudes before they leave the ground, too. It's the little things that make the big difference. It's the part of the blanket that hangs over the bed that keeps you warm. And if you don't believe that, you've never been in the service and been short-seated. I'll just tell you that right now. Let me ask you a question. In the area where you're from, what is the average commission on the sales that you almost make? What is the difference between almost making it and just, or almost making it and just barely missing it? See? If you just barely make it, of course, full commission. If you just barely miss it, no commission. I believe it's a series of little things. When I lost 1 9/10 ounces a day, in 10 months' time, I lost the weight. A little more tomorrow, doing your best. And then the next day and all the tomorrows forever are going to be really super for you. Let me tell you how, though I really learned how to reach those goals. See, if you're going to reach your goals, then you got to know how to train fleas. And if you don't know how to train fleas, you're just not going to make it. Could I see the number in this audience today, and I've never been more serious in my life, who do not know how to train fleas? Would you hold your hands high, please? Boy, I got here just in time. And I know you heard the one about the 2 fleas at the bottom of the hill, and one of them says, well, do we walk or take a dog? To make it a celebration. And I'm telling you, it has not been overrated. That's a good one. We're going to celebrate it again next year, as a matter of fact, if you want to know the truth. No, you don't pay the price, you enjoy the price. I'm just kind of curious at this moment, how many of you have noticed this pump sitting here on the table? That's amazing. Virtually everybody has already seen it. You know, as a general rule, when I get aboard an aircraft with this pump, almost without exception, I am the only passenger that's got one. Never will forget, I got aboard an aircraft one day, and this little girl said, what's that? And I very flippantly said, it's a pump. She said, what do you do with it? And I said, I pump. She said, well, what does that plaque say? And I held it up, and she read it to Zig, America's #1 flea trainer. And I said, yeah. She said, are you a flea trainer? I said, I sure am. She said, how do you train fleas? And I said, well, when the aircraft is airborne, come back to my seat, and I'll tell you. We got airborne. I'd had a change of heart, and I explained to her that a flea trainer was a person who's driven from within, that a flea trainer jumped out of the jar. That once a person became convinced that what they were doing were morally right, and that it made a contribution, that they enjoyed doing it, and that it was a worthwhile service, that they went ahead, full speed ahead, and they did not let the negative people of life deter them from their objective if they knew that they were sound in their morals and in their thinking. And when I said that, the little girl leaned over and she kissed me on the forehead. And as she straightened up, there was just the trace of a tear in her eyes as she said, you know, you'll never be able to know how deeply pleased I am that I asked the question, and how grateful I am that you were courteous enough to answer it. She said, you know, all of my life I've wanted to be a stewardess. And I've only been one a short time. But she said, you know, I've been so miserable as a stewardess because my family brings unbelievable pressure to bear on me to get me to come home. And she said, I love the work. I enjoy serving people. And she said, to tell you the truth, today was to have been my last day. My bags are packed. They're aboard this aircraft. I was going home. But then she stood straight and tall and strong as she said, but I've changed my mind. She said, what I'm doing is right, and I love it. And I'm a good stewardess. I'll make a contribution. She said, I'm going to be a flea trainer. I've never seen the little girl since. I perhaps never will. But it had an impact on my life. You see, everywhere we go, I don't care who we contact, who we see, or how briefly it might be, we can either influence them positively or negatively. And if we ourselves are optimistic and enthusiastic and positive, then our chances, our opportunities for service are multiplied 100-fold. And yes, again, you can get the things in life that you want if you'll just help the others. I believe personally this pump over here says the things that I have been attempting to say all afternoon. I believe this is the story of life. I believe this pump's the story of America. I believe this pump is your story. I believe if you'll listen to what this pump has to say, that you will agree that the moments I've spent with you have been well spent, or would have been well spent, if I told you nothing except the story of the pump. So listen while the pump talks to you for a moment. I got a couple of good friends down in South Alabama. The names are Bernard Haygood and Jimmy Glenn. They were out riding through the South Alabama foothills one day, and they got a little thirsty. It's hot in South Alabama in August, and they saw this old abandoned farmhouse. Bernard was driving. He pulled behind the farmhouse, and there was this old abandoned pump. He hopped out of the car, he ran over, and he grabbed the handle, and he started to pump. Now, I'm just kind of curious, how many of you folks in this audience today have ever used one of these old pumps right here? Okay. Well, old Bernard was beginning to work up somewhat of a sweat. I mean, you know, it was hot, it was August, and he was thirsty. So after a couple of minutes, he said, Bernard, or Jimmy rather, you better get that old bucket over there and come over there and dip some water out of the creek. He said, we're going to have to prime the pump. How many of you know what I'm talking about when I say, hey, we got some pumpers here? That just means you got to put something in here before you get something out here. You see, so many people stand in front of the stove of life and say, stove, now give me some heat. Then I'll put some wood in you. So many times the secretary says, boss, give me a raise. Then I'll start coming to work on time. So many times the salesman says, make me the manager, and then I'll really show you what I can do. Oh, it's true, I've been a miserable failure as a salesman, but make me the manager because I need to be in charge. What they're saying is, reward me, and then I'll perform. But life doesn't work that way. The farmer will tell you that before the seed can come up, you got to put it in the ground. You got to prime the pump. Well, old Bernard wanted that drink of water. I mean, it is hot. It is August. And I can just imagine him visualizing that good, cool water, you know, coming out of that ground. And he was really working on that pump. But like I say, in South Alabama, it gets awful hot and always. He said, you know, Jimmy, I just don't believe it's in the water down there. Jimmy said, yes, it is, Bernard. You know, in South Alabama, the wells are deep, and we're glad they are. Because you see, in the deep well, you find the cool, the clean, the sweet, the pure, the best tasting water of all. You just have to do a lot of pumping to get it. And isn't he really talking about life when he says that? Isn't it true that the objectives in life that are really worthy are those objectives that we've got to do a lot of work on? Isn't it true that the boy or the girl who says no to most opportunities to go out, aren't they the desirable ones when we start seeking that mate to spend that life with? Isn't it true that the opportunities that are real opportunities are those that we have to be willing to make the contribution and prepare and plan? And isn't it true that the football team that wins is a football team that does a lot of pumping beginning in spring practice and then summer and fall, getting in condition? Isn't it true that the A student, the scholar, the one who gets the best marks, has been doing the preparing and the planning all along? Well, you know, that's the way it is with this pump. Old Bernard wanted that drink of water. I mean, it is hard. It is August. And he was just bound and determined to get it. But the question then comes up, just how much pumping are you willing to do in order to get that drink of water? And finally, old Bernard just threw up his hand and said, Jimmy, it just ain't no water down there. Jimmy said, don't stop, Bernard, don't stop. If you do, the water goes all the way back down, and then you're going to have to start all over. And isn't that the story of life? Isn't it true that so many times it's the darkest just before the dawn? Have you ever worked on a math problem or a geometry problem or a calculus or physics or chemistry problem? Worked and worked and worked and worked and worked, and you just absolutely finally just threw up your hands, and who knows how close you were to the solution. You know, there's no way you can look at that pump and say, yep, just 2 more strokes and now we got the water. You see, the water might be 10 feet deep. There's no way a salesman can look into the head of his prospect and say, yep, all I need to do is use 2 more closes and then I'm going to make my sale. But this we know, my pumping friends, we know that if we pump long enough and hard enough and enthusiastically enough, that eventually the reward that always follows the effort will bring forth the reward. And we know too, don't we, pumpers, that once you get that water to flowing, then all you got to do is keep a little easy, steady pressure on it. You're going to get more water than you know what to do with. And isn't that the story of life? Isn't it true? Thank you. Isn't it true, ladies and gentlemen, that so many times it's the darkest just before dawn? And isn't it true that once we worked on those geometry problems and once finally when we get the answer we say, oh, why didn't I see it long ago? It just takes a little more pumping. You know why I like the story of my pump? I like the story of this pump, ladies and gentlemen, because you see, this has nothing to do with your age or education. Has nothing to do with whether you're black or white. Has nothing to do with whether you're Catholic or Jew or Protestant. Has nothing to do with whether you're male or female, old or young, extrovert or introvert, extremely well educated or relatively uneducated. Has nothing to do with whether you're tall or short or whatever. This is your God-given rights as free people. To work as long as you wish, as hard as you wish, and as enthusiastically as you wish to get everything in life that you really want out of life. I'm going to close this evening, and of course you got to understand now that when us Baptists say finally, that doesn't necessarily mean immediately, but I'm going to close this afternoon by telling you a story which I personally believe says everything just about it that I want to say in life in one story. I think it reinforces what I've been talking about all the way through. And I want to tell you before I even start this story, how delighted that I have been to be a part of Kansas City today. My career as a speaker was launched in Kansas City 12 years ago. And I look back with the fondest of memories as to what your city has meant to me, because this was my first major address. Never forget it. Shared the platform with Elmer Wheeler, who's now dead, with Dr. Kenneth McFarland, with Charles Roth, with Senator Millward Simpson from Wyoming, and with Joe Batten, who spoke on management. Oh, it was quite an occasion for me, and today, of course, equally significant. To share the platform with Donnie Hudson as the Master of Ceremonies, and he and I do so much work around the country, as does Cabot Robert, who's on the platform with us. And of course, who wouldn't be thrilled to be a part of a program that had W. Clement Stone and Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who's been my hero for so many years, and not to mention Paul Harvey. Oh, it's been an occasion. Let me conclude with this little story. When I was here 12 years ago, I was staying in the Mulebach Hotel. I finished on Saturday afternoon. I was living in Columbia, South Carolina, and I could not catch a plane back to my home that evening. I stepped into the lobby of the Mulebach Hotel after having been up to change clothes, expecting to go out for a lonely dinner. When I stepped off the elevator, I heard the booming voice of a man whom I've come to love, really, as a brother. His name was Bernie Lofchick. He's from Winnipeg, Canada. And this booming voice of his, he said, "Zig! Where are you going?" You could have heard him halfway over Kansas City. And I said, "Bernie, I'm going to dinner." He said, "Well, Zig, I'll make you a deal. If you'll go with me, I'll buy it." Well, I have a standard policy. When somebody offers to buy my dinner, I'll let them. So I said, "Okay, Bernie, let's go." We went to dinner, and because our backgrounds were so similar, both of us had lost our fathers when we were very young. Both of us had gone to work in a grocery store as children. Both of us had gotten in the cookware business at an early stage of our professional careers. We sat there and started talking. I said, "Bernie, you've certainly come a long way to attend a rally from Winnipeg, Canada." He said, "Zig, I certainly have, and it's been a tremendous experience. I've loved every moment of it." And I said, "Well, I hope you learned something, because you spent some dollars to get here." And he said, "Well, Zig, I did learn a tremendous amount," but he said, "You know, thanks to my son David, I don't have to worry about money." And I said, "Bernie, that sounds like a story. Would you share it?" And he said, "I'd be delighted." He said, "You know, Zig, when our son was born, our joy literally knew no bounds. Because we already had our 2 daughters, now we had our son, the family was complete. But it wasn't long," he said, "before we noticed that something was wrong. Little David's head hung too limpid to the right side of his body. He drooled too much to be a normally healthy baby. But the family doctor said, 'Don't worry about it, he'll outgrow it.' But he said, 'You know, Zig, we did worry about it.' So we took him to another doctor, this time a specialist. And of all things, the specialist diagnosed his condition as the reverse of club feet, and treated him for that condition for a number of weeks. But he said, 'You know, Zig, we knew it was more serious than that, so we took him to yet another specialist, one of the most outstanding specialists in Western Canada. This man examined our son very thoroughly. When he finished, he looked at us and said, "This little boy is a spastic. He has cerebral palsy. He's never going to be able to walk or talk or count to 10. I suggest that you put him in an institution for his own good and for the good of the, quote, normal members of the family." But Bernie looked at me, and those dark eyes of his were flashing as he said, "But you know, Zig, I'm not a buyer. I'm a seller. I could not see consigning my son to the life of a vegetable." And so we went to another doctor, and then to another, and another, and yet another, and another, until 30 doctors all told had said, "For this little boy, there is no hope." And then we heard of another doctor, Dr. Pearlstein, down in Chicago, reputedly the foremost authority in the world on cerebral palsy. We got an alternate appointment because Dr. Pearlstein was booked 2 years in advance. People from all over the world came to see him because of his reputation. And he said, "You know, we got lucky, Zig, or maybe it wasn't luck." And of course, obviously, I know that it wasn't. But 11 days later, a little boy from Australia canceled. The Lofchicks took their son to Chicago for the examination. And that's where things started to happen. Dr. Pearlstein examined this little boy. Maybe as no child has ever been examined before. He did something different from the other doctors. Each of the others had taken the x-rays that the prior doctors had made And all they had done was reconfirm what each preceding doctor had decided was the problem. Dr. Pearlstein started over, called in the best X-ray technician available, had him read the X-rays. Finally, when the examination was completed, he looked at the Loftics and said, "This little boy is a spastic. He has cerebral palsy. He's never going to be able to walk or talk or count to 10 if you listen to the prophets of doom." But he said, "I want you to know that I am not problem conscious. I am solution conscious. I believe that there is something that can be done for this little boy if you do your part." And the Lofties quite obviously said, "Doctor, tell us what to do. We'll pay any price." And the doctor said, "Well, obviously the financial cost is going to be great. But of infinitely more importance than the financial involvement is the personal involvement. There's some things you got to understand. You're going to have to push this little boy beyond all human endurance. Then you're going to have to push him some more. You're going to have to work him until he literally falls. Then you're going to have to pick him up and work him some more. Another thing is you cannot give him therapy with any other victim of cerebral palsy. Because he said, you see, we become part of what we are around. And if he sees other victims with their awkward, inadvertent movements as they struggle for identity and performance, then David will instinctively, subconsciously pick up the awkward movements of the other victims, give him the therapy in privacy. One more thing you got to understand. You can never stop. Once you put your shoulder to the wheel, you have undertaken a lifetime task, because sometimes it'll be months, sometimes years before you can detect any change at all. It's going to be a forever objective. The Loftics went home. For the first time, there was some hope in their life with their son. They hired a physical therapist and a bodybuilder. They built a gymnasium down in the basement of their home. It took them a lot of months, but finally one day David Loftic could move the length of his own body. It took him several years then, but one day the therapist called Bernie home and he said, "Bernie, I believe David is ready. Come on home." And Bernie went home. David Loftic was on a mat down in the gymnasium, getting ready to do a push-up. And as that little body started to rise into the air, the physical and emotional exertion was so great, there wasn't a dry inch of skin on that little body. The mat looked as if you had poured water on it. And when that one push-up was accomplished, Mother and Dad, little David, the two sisters, the therapist, the bodybuilder, the neighbors, the doctor, all broke down and shed the tears that so clearly say, happiness is not pleasure. Happiness is victory. And the story, ladies and gentlemen, is even more remarkable when we understand that one of America's leading universities had examined this little boy and said there are no motor connections to the right side of his body. He has no sense of balance. He's never going to be able to walk. He's never going to be able to swim or to skate or to ride a bicycle. It will be extraordinarily difficult for him to ever even learn how to walk and stand. On October the 23rd, 1971, my wife and I flew to Winnipeg, Canada, to attend the bar mitzvah of little David Loftic. I wish you could have been there. I wish every living, breathing human being in the world could have seen at least a video of what took place that day as this little boy walked tall and straight and strong to the front of the synagogue to exchange the words that moved him into the profession of faith of his forefathers, moved him into the manhood of that faith. I wish you could have seen this little boy as he spoke clearly and distinctly. I wish you could have seen this little boy who, at that time, had done as many as 1,000 push-ups in a single day. I wish you could have seen this little boy who's run as many as 5 or 6 miles, rather, nonstop, who skated on the neighborhood hockey team, who ran the wheels off of his 4th bicycle, who is a 7th grader, qualified for St. John's Ravens Court School for Boys, where he did extremely well in 9th grade mathematics. Wish you could see this little boy who skated of 1974 qualified for an unrated $100,000 ordinary life insurance policy. Maybe as far the only one before or since who has ever this particular thing. Wish you could see him. You could say 195 pounds with a barrel for a chest. Say that logic will be Mr. Manitoba. Simple. That he is the most been my privilege. Logic story. I see him from 2 to 10 to 10 to 10 to 10. How many times have I seen this little one sit up? I wonder how much bigger, and smarter, and would have been. How much would have been? He would have been. He would have. And if he had in life, just normal health. Then one day it hit me like a ton of bricks. Had he been given more to start with, he undoubtedly up with a great deal less than he has today. I believe that's the reason God tells us in His book to thank Him for everything. Because you see, before it happens, it's already crossed His desk. And He knows what the future is. A story of David, because you see, here's a little boy who for all of these years has spent 3 hours a day staying even. When we think of the 24-hour day and know that David has a 21-hour day and will for the rest of his life, it gives us pause to think and be grateful for what we have. I think of all of the effort that was expended. I think of the pump story again, because you see, for one solid winter, David Loftus got up every morning 1 hour before any other member of the family. With the wind chill as much as 80 degrees below zero, David strapped or put his skates on and crawled out to the frozen ice. Took him one solid winter just to learn how to stand up. And now look at him today. And I look at all of the things that happen, and I believe that it just epitomizes so much. You see, it epitomizes and expresses the value of a healthy self-image. David could not have that to begin with, but he does today. His parents looked at him and did not see him as a helpless, hopeless invalid. They saw him as a little boy who deserved a chance in life and treated him as such, and he responded as we always will. Goals, you cannot believe the goals, the hourly goals, the daily goals, the weekly goals, the monthly goals, the yearly goals, the lifetime goals. Attitude, when this boy was 2 years, bought him a cassette player. And from that moment on, he's been listening every day. As he takes those exercises, as he goes to school, he's infused with a clean, positive, powerful series of affirmations. You can do it. Work, unbelievable. Desire for success, desire for health, incredible. It's all there. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, in Canada, you have the free enterprise system, which we also have here to even a greater degree. So I say this: believe in you. Believe in your fellow human. Believe in the opportunity that you have with the company you represent, the products you merchandise, or the service that you render. Believe in the philosophy and the policies of that company. Believe that America is the land of the free, the home of the brave, the land where you can get anything that you make a contribution for. And believe in Almighty God. So if you do, then I close not by wishing you a good day. I close by guaranteeing you a good forever. And I will see you at the top. God bless you, and thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Zig Ziglar, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Tremendous.